It's Johnny Diaz, Joy on Vision Christian Radio. It's Neil with you. It's the Thursday edition of 2020 and a interesting conversation today too, I think is going to really capture our imagination. And I'll invite you shortly to join in. You might have a question, you might have a comment, you might even have a critique for our conversation. That's okay too. So 1-800-316-316 shortly when we open our talkback lines. We're heading into a discussion today about human behaviour with an interior designer whose expertise is in behavioural psychology. We'll talk about how we understand ourselves and, secondarily, how we understand others. Clients hire our special guest today as an interior designer, but her work goes much deeper in an understanding of how our temperament affects dimensions of our lives, like our marriage, our money, and our Christian interactions. Well, sometimes our relationships are strained or we're inhibited from successes because of how we understand temperaments. Well, our special guest today is Deborah de Jong. Deborah is a behavioural consultant who leads an organisation called Emmanuel One. Deborah has a broad career history as a television personality and the founder of the successful retail company Fantastic Furniture, so a co-founder of that Fantastic Furniture. Deborah, a special welcome along to 2020.
An absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you, Neil.
Deborah, let's talk about what we're going to talk about. I think just getting started, because some of these things can be complex, but for some of us, relationships are strained. Or we're inhibited and we feel like we've hit a ceiling and we can't go beyond that, heading for a career success or two and always struggling with all sorts of things. And because of different temperaments, how do you describe the sorts of effects that happen if you don't have a pretty sound understanding of where temperaments are important?
Look, it's more an understanding that we're not all the same, and we know that. We come to the table with into the earth with talents, gifts, and abilities that are different from everybody else on the planet, and no two people are the same. But there are some inherent skills that we tend to fall into categories of. So, illustratively, half of the planet is fast-paced and half of the planet is slow-paced. So, the bizarre thing is we often partner with someone who is diametrically opposed. So there's an organic conflict, even just in the pace that we operate at. Some people will want to race through a book if they're reading it really fast and get to the end and talk about it, and the other person wants to really labour and take time and process and digest, and that just reading the same book can cause conflict. So within the house and the home, if you've got children that are different temperaments and two are fast-paced and two are slow-paced, mum's screaming at the kids to get in the car and why haven't you picked up your boots on the way through, and the other child is in the car going, will you hurry up, we need to get to the football game. So just that every day in, day out can cause, conflict within the house and home. But it's more a fact of seeking first to understand before being understood. We have to change our dial to accommodate the people that we're with, not because we're changing ourselves, but because we're called to love. And sometimes love means accommodating.
So if you find yourself in a constant conflict, some people, this is their life. I'm misunderstood. Nobody understands me. And it may be that there could be just a few little missing pieces. Do you describe it a little bit like that? That if you're always blaming others for the conflict you're in, perhaps take a step back, a little bit of self-assessment, and then understanding how others think. Do you think that might be part of a resolution of some of the conflicts we find ourselves in?
I think identity, if we know who we are, you can monitor your own identity, and it is very much categorizing yourself. So for myself, I work with DNA behavior, and you find yourself in one of four temperaments, which is lifestyle, stability, information, and goal setter. Now, you will fall naturally, organically into one of those spaces. If you know that you're a goal setter, you're results focused, you're not relationship focused. If you're a lifestyle temperament, you're relationship focused. So you want to stand and have a chat and communicate it out. The goal setter just is ready, fire, aim. So if you know that about yourself, you can strengthen weaknesses and harness strengths.
So
You know,
you
it's about,
mentioned
yeah,
four
please.
personality types: goal
I
setter,
Goal
lifestyle,
setter,
stability,
lifestyle,
and
stability, and
information.
information.
We'll come around
Correct.
some of those as we continue our conversation. But let's talk about your story for a moment here, because
Sure.
you've delved into some of these things, and no doubt that's helped you to make sense of some of the colourful career that you have had. You started really your career as a flight attendant for Qantas. Give us a little
I
in a
did.
nutshell. In a nutshell, tell us your story here, Deborah.
Look, I wanted to travel the world, and the best way to do that was for somebody else to pay for it. So I jumped on the end of a trolley and became a trolley dolly for Qantas in long haul for 10 years, and had at the time of my life traversing the planet and shopping in New York and seeing the latest shows in London and buying shoes in Rome, all on somebody else's expense account, which was great. And I got to meet a lot of people. You know, every time you go to work, you've got 400 people who are from incredible walks of life and traveling for various reasons. For that, they might be going to a wedding or a burial or a celebration, or the passing of a family member or an engagement. So you meet so many people. It's the most fascinating role on the planet. But I went from that, and my husband at the time, we had been looking at a lot of international furniture and thinking there's a lot overseas that we don't have. And the ranges, we were very, very, very restricted back in the 80s with what we had. We weren't doing a great deal of importing. So we started a company called Fantastic Plastic, actually, doing outdoor furniture. And it did so well that people were looking for indoor furniture as well. So we started a manufacturing plant. And by the time we left Fantastic, we had 20 company-owned stores and 500 staff, and we were manufacturing here. And ironically, I knew that I had to do some study to prepare so that I knew what I was talking about. So I went and studied interior design and got a grip on colour and colour psychology and environment and why people are still attracted to cobalt blue lounge suites. Heaven forbid, they're the things that you see at the end of the council clear out these cobalt blue lounges and think, who would buy one of those things? But still one of the best-selling lounges that on the market. So I had to study and get the curriculum right for that, which led me into interior design.
Wonderful, colourful history, and you've been a television presenter as well. And interesting for listeners today, not only are you going to talk some Christian dimensions around these sorts of things, but you might even leave this conversation today with some inspiration to redesign your living space. Because in
Yeah.
some sense, we can't always detach the spirituality of our lives from the environment that we look to create. And that might even be the way we're designing our living area and our bedroom. How do you see the holistic nature of what happens with temperament and design and even including our faith? How do you see that?
Yeah, look, I think we are naturally attracted to certain things, and I'll give an illustration here with temperaments. So, an information temperament loves all their ducks in a row. They love a really clean desk. They're most because they've got a lot going upstairs. They're very cerebral. They love to process, and they were made that way. God gifted them with being cerebral and being in that process lane. So they need a very clean, tidy work environment. Bipolar extreme, a lifestyle temperament, they are stimulated by colour and movement and texture. So they need high chroma colours in their space. They need texture to touch and feel and for their creative juices to flow. They're often artistic and creative people. So if you've got the two people in the same home, one is going to go crazy and be packing you away all the time, and the other one is going to be leaving lots of high colour things about that are going to drive you nuts. So you have to create spaces for yourself where there is compatibility and a space of your own. But again, as I sort of mentioned previously, you have been Psalm 139, you were birthed in your mother's womb. You were intricately and curiously wrought, knit as though embroidered with fine silks and linens in the depths of your mother's womb when as yet there were no days. Now, that means that there's only one of you. Some people on the planet are saying, thank God that there's only one of you, but you have to find what's right for you. You have to find what makes you feel, it brings comfort, peace, joy, happiness, and surround yourself with those things, because you might have colour memories that are entirely different from your realisation. I hate the colour yellow. It's a bizarre thing. I don't know why. In the 50s, they did a study where they painted a wing of a psychiatric unit yellow, and something cognitively attracted those with bipolar disorder. So our cognizant brain goes beyond our rational brain at times. In the States, they paint Banksy pink in most of the prisons. 80% of the prisons are painted pink because it reminds them of the mother's womb, and it brings a calming effect. So we don't look into those aspects on a day-to-day life, but I think if you start taking check of noticing where you feel, when you go to dine at night, if you're going out for dinner, where do you like to sit at the table? A lifestyle person will like lots of chairs around because they love to use their arms and gesticulate and talk, whereas the goal setter needs to be at the head of the table because he's achieved high success. So we do have innuendos that are there from day to day that just aren't noticed.
So we are all created individuals, and it is something of a benefit where psychologists have been able to identify and break this down into different sections of the community that might think certain ways. And for listeners who are thinking, I've heard this sort of thing before, when Deborah says goal setter or lifestyle, stability or information, there's some other ways that people have interpreted these things. And I'll get your thoughts here, Deborah, but in my understanding, a little bit of research before our conversation today, there's another way of looking at those things, the goal setter or the choleric temperament, like the lion. There's the lifestyle that is equivalent to the sanguine personality, or as some like to describe, the otter or the influencer. Then there's the stability temperament. There's like the golden retriever, the phlegmatic person who is steady, and the information, which is like the melancholic temperament, or the beaver who is compliant. Is that a fair enough little assessment of the way?
Absolutely. And again, it doesn't matter which order they're given in. At the end of the day, they operate the same way. They are inherently the same characters. And so if there's an awareness of a different phrase that best represents it for you, just being aware will help you to modify your behaviour. And again, it's harnessing strengths and strengthening weaknesses once you know.
And Deborah, over the years, there's been opportunity that you have had to be able to use these skills that you've developed into some ministry context as well. What sort of ways do you use this sort of thing in your Christian experience?
Look, at the one thing that I did recently, which I really enjoyed, was speaking. My market had been architects and interior designers, and I did cracking the communication code, and potentially that demographic hasn't really been familiarised with the profiling as much as potentially those in Christendom. So it was wonderful to be able to have, 100 architects online and explain personality profiling and where they might fit. Because the world will look to star signs and look to other things that don't necessarily explain it as well as the profiling. So cracking the communication code allows, in this instance, architects to understand their client and to be able to listen. We seek first to understand before being understood. And in reality, it helps them to increase their business, because if you take a great brief, you're going to be able to come back with a fantastic product. The problem is, I mean, and women will agree with me, sorry, men in the world, but men don't listen. This is what we hear out there in the media all the time. Men just don't listen. Yes, we are different beings, but if men can take a step back sometimes and just say, can you just explain? Let me hear what it is that you need to say or what you're professing, and process and feed that back. You can solve 90% of the arguments just by being heard. So I use it wherever I can within a domestic situation to bring cohesion and to allow one to see the other's potential polar extreme view, and also to bring them to a place of saying, neither of you are wrong, you're just different. Some are relationship focused and some are goal setter focused.
What do you do with your organisation that you're leading now, Emmanuel One? What's that all about?
Yeah, well, fundamentally, what I do is I go into corporations and bring them some assistance. So understanding their staff. So we profile their staff and cross-profile their staff, because it's often heavy in a certain area. We need all four fundamental types within each workplace. For one thing, we need to have a good cross-pollinated group of people working together. We need our information people to be detail people. We need our goal setter people, and we need our buoyancy. We need our lifestyle people in there. And of course, we need our border collies or our phlegmatic people to keep the place nice and smooth and easy running. So the people that are on staff. But then it goes beyond that, the environment that the people work within that company. If we are working 8 to 10 hours a day and or working from home, you want productivity and joy from your work colleagues. It shouldn't be a bore to go to work. It should be a pleasure and a joy. And if you want productivity, you need to create spaces that are something like biophilic spaces. If we're turning our face away from the laptop and looking to greenery, it's going to soothe and calm and bring a sense of peace, and we feel at home, and your creative juices will flow. So looking at the staff and ensuring the staff are all cohesive, but then looking at the environment and making sure that's decked out to accommodate spaces for people to work more effectively.
Well, our special guest is Deborah de Jong. Deborah is a behavioural consultant who leads an organisation called Emmanuel One. Our talkback line is open. You might have your own question or comment. You might even have a critique for our conversation too. I always invite that. At 1800 316 316. We're back with Deborah some more in just a few moments. 1800 316 316 to join in our conversation today as we're talking temperaments. Our special guest is Deborah de Jong. Deborah is a behavioural consultant. 1800 316 316. We've been talking about personality types. For some who are goal setters, others who are lifestyle oriented. Some are into stability and others into information. And as Deborah says, every workplace, every family potentially needs to have this sort of mix. Let me ask you here, Deborah, when we're talking about analysing behaviours, and there's no right or wrong in all of that, but is this an art or is it a science as it's developed over the years?
I think it's a bit of both. I think if you and I sat in a room and people watched, I'm quite sure as an art form we could dog ear certain members who have inherent behaviour that could be categorised. However, I also think there's a science around it. It's the simplicity of filling out a questionnaire that is geared towards an out percentage outcome. So, I think inherently it is an art form in its foundational stages, but it's turned into a science, as rightly mentioned. And I think we can all be, we're all ever growing and ever changing. But I think, I often laugh with people and I think, I'm asking you now, and when you were a little boy in the playground, were you the little boy that was pushed over, the one that did the pushing, the one that leaned over to help the child up, or were you the one that pushed the pusher?
I think I was probably the one helping the child up. That's probably where I sat in that. But then, I might even be able to remember times when I pushed over the other kids. So, you know what? There's going to be a little bit of rough and tumble. So I wasn't always. I wasn't. I remember actually I've been bullied. But I remember too, being able to hold my own. But there are challenging ways that we might actually put each other into, even some or all of those different temperaments at different times. But I imagine what we look for is that temperament that is the strongest, that might characterize who we are.
Yeah, well, we're all capable of all of those temperaments. We're all capable
Yes.
of all four at any one time, depending on which buttons are pushed and if we're having a bad or good day. But you do look to children in a playground and you can see the natural leaders. You can see the ones that are the outgoing jokesters that would love to have a bit of a giggle and make a fool of themselves. And I say that with in the nicest possible way. There are those who are sensitive and want to help other people and are compassionate naturally. And there are those, the outgoing introverts who want to sit in the corner on their own and have a sandwich by themselves because they've just had 3 hours of school and they're processing, what's gone on. So I think if you look back to childhood, that's before the world got hold of us and changed potentially how we modify our behaviour. So the fact that we've got a science now that can analyse and being honest with some of the psychometric testing, giving a real answer, not the answer that you think other people want to hear or what you should be saying, but saying, yes, I have got a bad temper, or yes, I do fire off every now and again when I shouldn't, or, no, I don't really want to stop and help someone if I saw them broken over on the side of the road. If you're honest with the psychometric testing, it'll show you your core. And again, we're always a work in progress, so you can always refine who you are. I look at somebody like Bob Goff, and I think what an incredible human being he is, that he just loves the world. And I'm thinking, I couldn't think of anything worse than loving the world. At the end of the day, I need to come away and debrief and process my day in a very different way. But some people are introverts, some are extroverts, and they'll gain their energy from being with people and some from away from people. And that's okay. We need all of them on the planet.
I love your thoughts on refining who you are. And I did hear a reflection, I think, many years ago, which was a critique of when we discuss these temperaments, because when you do the testing, sometimes you can find yourself categorized. You're put into a category, and we might say, are we always going to be in the same category for all of our lives, just because we've been shaped a certain way? But of course, the Christian conversion experience and as you were saying a little earlier, your identity, when you identify with Jesus, who probably is the only person in the history of the world who has been all four of those 100%, all four of those different temperaments, then somehow or other we've got to leave some room for transformation and changing to be like Christ. How do you see things like that?
Yeah, look, I think we are ever a work in progress, and we can make poor and hand up first to having made poor decisions in life. When circumstances come and go and you think I could have done that differently. But, the old adage of what would Jesus do in this situation? Sometimes you'd fire off and get aggressive or be anxious or, make a decision based on your emotion. And you actually have to take a step back and say, hang on a sec. What's the right thing to do in this situation? How do I make the best outcome here? And it's ever challenging. You don't have to make your decision based on your temperament. You make your decision based on wisdom. And we are ever learning and ever in progress. If we look at perhaps at our younger selves, we may have attacked something a little bit harder or faster or in a non-diplomatic way. Thank God for Jesus that we have a guide and a Holy Spirit to say, hang on a sec, just step out of that situation or come in with love or come in with affection or come in with fondness, or have you prayed about it yet? And what's the Lord telling you to do in this situation? It's that the little voice on the shoulder, as it were, guiding, and that little beat of the heart guiding you to make a better choice. And sometimes it's not saying anything at all, but just being calm in the storm, or the prayerful person in the situation, rather than jumping in. Yeah.
How do you discuss and form some thoughts here, Deborah? Because a lot of people will have an aspiration for their life. Some will say, "I want to be a leader," but I've done the personality profiling and I've discovered that I'm a sanguine lifestyle person, a little bit like the otter, and sometimes the sanguine person doesn't always make the best leader. Is there something that in the aspiration that I have to be a leader that actually leads me into adjusting the way that my temperament excels, and I can become a little bit more that goal setter type, the choleric person, the lion, who actually usually make the best sorts of leaders? Is that sort of change? Can that happen with aspiration?
I don't think. I think there's room on the planet for every type of leader. Just because somebody will step into the role automatically, you have to modify your behavior, and that's where the dials are. If ordinarily you would speak more prolifically, that in that board meeting, if you're a lifestyle person, you've put in an ELT position, you have to modify your behavior to tone down your talking. You're not the most important person in the room at that point in time. So understanding your strengths and weaknesses, you can modify your behavior and be a better leader despite your temperament. I'm quite sure that people in stability and information roles, or sanguine melancholy roles, are put into positions of leadership through family businesses or through default, or they're the most detailed person. Half of our accountants and bean counters are in that phase. Well, they're also leaders in another fashion. They're just perhaps not as verbose.
So we've got lifestyle people and stability people who can learn to be goal setters, and the goal setter can learn to be the person who's across all the information. Hey, we're going to continue our conversation after the news. 1-800-316-316 to join in our conversation. Deborah de Jong is our guest, a behavioural consultant. You can join our conversation on 1-800-316-316. Wonderful to have you with us on this Thursday edition of 2020. If you're just joining us, you're joining into a fascinating conversation as we are deciphering the communication code and talking about things like our temperaments and our personalities. We're in a discussion today about human behaviour with an interior designer whose expertise is in behavioural psychology. Now, we're talking about how we understand ourselves and secondarily how we understand others. Clients hire our special guest today as an interior designer, but her work goes much deeper in an understanding of how our temperament affects dimensions of our lives, like our marriage or our money or our Christian interactions. Sometimes our relationships are strained or we're inhibited from successes because of how we understand temperaments. Well, our special guest is Deborah de Jong, a behavioural consultant who leads an organisation called Emmanuel One. Deborah's got a broad career history, and our conversation today is open for your interaction. Our talkback line is open on 1-800-316-316. 1-800-316-316 to join in our conversation. Deborah, before we take things a little bit further, why don't we take a call from a listener? Katie is in Nil in Victoria. Hi, Katie. Welcome.
Hi, Neil and Deborah. How are you today?
Very good. What are your thoughts, Katie?
Sorry, this is a really interesting conversation to me because I'm a creative, so more of a creative, and I like colour. And I've got some leadership roles, but the other person, my husband his surname's de Jong, amazingly enough.
Okay.
But he's a head person, and we just moved to a new place, and this is a classic example, because he's kind of a minimalist, and he wants, perfect order, which, I like it tidy, but I like it tidy, but lots of colour, and I like to feel relaxed. Does that make sense? And I like other people to feel comfortable. But like he wants all the mowing done perfectly, and if there's a weed, we'll just poison it. And I was like, no, I need to keep those.
You need to keep the weeds.
No, some of them you can actually eat, and I actually found out it was true. I was looking it up yesterday, and I actually made a salad last night from some things in the garden that he wanted to poison. That's one example. I also cut opals for a living, so I'm very colourful in what I'm doing. I had an opal business for a couple of years. But, sorry, just one thing I wanted to say. When I was at school, I was just listening to what you were saying. I was always the one with a friend that was fighting the schoolyard bullies.
Okay.
And, if I see someone in the street that's, sitting out on the street and they're looking for money, I want to give them money every single time. So I actually have to fight that urge because sometimes it's not practical.
Right. Katie, let's get Deborah's thoughts as you're sharing your story and letting us in with some wonderful dimensions of your life. How do you see Katie here, Deborah, and what can we contribute here along the lines of what Katie's asking?
Yeah, great to meet you, Katie. Look, I get it. It's the challenge when you have a partner who is diametrically opposed in their preferences for living spaces. And sometimes people think I'm an interior designer, but 90% of the time I turn out to be a counsellor. So I'll put my counsellor hat here on and say there is a way that you can do this. I would suggest if he's got a home office, that you let his home office be exactly as he needs it. It could be a space where he can go. That's his retreat. It doesn't need to have colour in there. And if there is... Sorry?
Sorry. He has a shed too. So he has a big shed space and an office space.
So if he has a shed and an office space, there's got to be this horrid word called compromise, where he can have whatever he wants in the shed, as ordered as he likes, and in his office as beautiful and pristine. But under the understanding, a living environment, there needs to be for you a space where there is colour. Now, when I say colour, we don't have to paint every wall fuchsia. We can have cushions that will add colour. We can have plants that will add colour. We can have tea towels or, small items, or if it's a bathroom, we can have colour in our towels. You could live in a really neutral coloured home but have splashes of colour that are ordered that will also appeal to him. So, yes, there has to be compromise, but I'd suggest this, and we were having a little chat with Neil earlier about this, that you create a space of your own somewhere in the house. It might be a reading nook, and if you're in your opals, that there might be an area that you can go and have your splashes of colour, and it's just a space for you. A beautiful book by Carson called A Room of Her Own. And if there is a space that you can shut that door, that's just your space, if there's room enough in the house, and he has his shed and can keep it as tidy as possible, and a home office that's in his order, then you each have a place that you can go to that you can shut the door and stay away from anybody else's conflict.
Yeah, at this place we can, because the last place we were at, I wasn't allowed to grow flowers, for example. But now I'm allowed to have flowers in a veggie garden. So it's actually been a good progression. We now have more spaces that we can both, and I'm going to have my own workshop for my opals, whereas before I used to have to go out away from home to cut them. So,
perfect.
I agree, you can do it.
You can do it. It sounds as though It sounds like you've worked towards finding a solution naturally, which is really lovely to hear. But again, I mean, it is in the living areas where it's a common area. You have to come to some sort of understanding where it's a little bit of compromise. You can have the neutral colours in your furniture, but it's the scatter cushions or the art that maybe has a little bit of colour. And you'd be surprised how much he gravitates towards a decent piece of art or a decent coloured cushion rather than the whole area looking like flora and fauna, So a good shopping guide is to travel out together and find pieces that you're both attracted to.
Katie, thank you so much for your call. And our talkback line is open on 1800 316 316. We're talking about interior design. We're talking about temperaments. And, you know, in this day and age, Deborah, some people will say the world's gone mad. Things are crazy. Even cost of living, those issues that are going on around our families. We've got a youth crime epidemic in some states around the nation. The place that we have when we are at home, a little bit like a sanctuary, it's a special space. What are your thoughts for those who are dealing with some really challenging situations, whether it's at work or whether it's in relationships, about how you might actually start to structure your own environment so that that brings out the best in you?
Look, I'll second what you're saying, Neil. And we've gone through pandemics, and we've gone through interest rate rises. We've gone through logistics challenges within industries, and there's just so much in the media at the moment where you scratch your head. It really feels like on a daily basis, if you watch the news, that the world has gone a little bit crazy, and so we have to create some non-crazy in our life. And that place has to be our home. So as we open the door to go into our premises, it has to be a place of nurture, a sanctuary, a room of our own away from the crazy, where you can take away the noise and take away the chaos and the infiltration and create a space where you can find centre again. And some of those things can be done, obviously, from a spiritual perspective with setting aside time to read and pray and that, but also from a visual perspective, you can create a nurturing environment just by using colours. For example, from a colour psychology perspective, green will make you feel placid and placated. It reminds you of nature. So having plants around the house. I'm not talking about spending a fortune to decorate your home so you come home to a palace. You can do this as simply as stopping at Bunnings and buying some indoor plants that are going to soften your thoughts, because they're a lovely colour green. Towels in your bathroom, if they were a plusher finish, you can go to Target to get a slightly plusher towel. I'm not talking about shopping at an expensive place, or splash out and buy Egyptian cotton if you really want to spend a little bit of money. So when you get into bed at night, you really feel a sense of, I'm debriefing from the day. This is my space of rest, my space of peace. You might want to have oils, organic oils burning or in a diffuser, and that scent of jasmine as you walk in gives you that sense of overwhelming calm within your house. I don't know if you've ever got up in the morning on a weekend and somebody's put a pot of coffee on, and just that smell of coffee, it's only a few dollars, but it makes a change to how you feel in your day. So I'd suggest, I'm not suggesting spending a fortune, but I'm suggesting make your home a haven and a place of sanctuary so that you can turn off from the craziness of the world and bring a bit of peace and order into your life, and a little bit of nurture and self-preservation. Because then when you open the door to go back out into society again, the grey noise cranks up again, I'm afraid.
Well, you've come home to a house and there's the smell of freshly brewed coffee, and your walls are a nice pale green, and your furniture is in your favourite colour, and your cushions are all set. There is something special about doing that, and as you say, you can do this on whatever budget you can afford, because it's not necessarily all about what expensive furniture you have, but it's those things that are to do with colour and smell. And when we're talking about these things, it's not just an individual thing, because if you're talking about your own family, your own spouse and your children, somehow or other you've got to be interested in creating an environment where they get to excel and to get creative and to have a good outlook on what they're facing in their lives. Is that a fair enough way to say this? You've got to do this not just for yourself, but for your family?
No, I would agree, and I'd say particularly for parents. You want your children at home, at the end of the day. You don't really looking for entertainment. So, get them to sit down with an A3 canson piece of paper and give them some home magazines and say, if you could create any room, start creating a mood board and get them to put their favorite colors or their favorite things on a piece of paper. And you'll see a running thread on this mood board. It might be color combinations. And look, a can of paint's $60. You can paint walls in a bedroom for that price, or you can look at Target or Big W or some of the cheaper places for a duvet cover that's going to work. Or they can create their own piece of art. Stop at Bunnings or a $2 shop, buy a canvas and get them to create their own piece of art by sample pots of paint, so that their bedroom becomes their haven. It's their space that they can go to, that they can draw aside from the craziness of the world and maybe even the craziness of the family. If the family's busy, you want them in their bedroom reading a book and just unwinding and feeling that they're so welcome within their own home space. So children as well should have fabulous bedrooms.
Deborah, let me ask you about the Christian lifestyle that you might lead. So supposing you're running a home group and there are people who are coming to your house, or it might be the environment that you meet in your local church. And people come from all sorts of different backgrounds and different churches, and some are in old churches and some are in modern spaces. Or if you're in a charity organisation or a parachurch organisation, you're working diligently in the kingdom. How important is it to be able to think about the space that you're creating when you're relating to people who are outside? Any thoughts here?
Well, I think hospitality it just sort of runs in my blood. Having been a Qantas hostie, hospitality just runs in my blood. So you create an environment for someone to come and feel that they're welcome. There's the hospitality, and let me go there. One of the things that we were taught as a 20-year-old hostie was the professional fiddle, which was if you have a glass, you place the emblem of the glass towards the front, and this is how you fold a napkin. You don't have to spend a fortune to make people feel $1 million. It could just be the way that you're putting the food on the table and catering or offering that second cup of coffee. You don't have to create a palace in order for them to feel, that you're giving them their best. It's honor at the end of the day. You're honoring them coming into your home, you're respecting them, and you're stimulating their senses with, great smells, a hospitable environment, a welcome, something to eat, something to drink, and, and loving on them at the end of the day.
And in some sense here, you're designing your space for yourself and for your family, not necessarily for those who are outside, but you know that when you've designed your space, there's something communicated to those people outside, and you might want to make that a welcoming and hospitable environment so that you're not actually repelling people. Is that one way of looking at, how you might think of motivations for making change?
We've all been, have all been to. You're not going to feel comfortable in every home. I'm sure you've all been to that white house where you're scared to sit on the sofa in case you might crease it. And as you get off the lounge, the cushion is straightened behind you. There are those people on the planet. There's not much you can do about that. But at the end of the day, it's more about the person embracing you rather than the home embracing you. You have to accommodate being in the space. I mean, we've been to expensive restaurants where you feel uncomfortable at times. But obviously you are going to not go there as often as the place that makes you feel at home. So if you want the people coming back, certainly make it invitational.
Is there an orientation that points you in a direction for change or for those projects that you need to tackle, an outlook that might aspire to some successes? We don't want to be defeated all the time. If you feel good, if your space is looking right, how does that affect our confidence, do you think, when you're actually going to be facing those things that are challenging in, as we were saying, in this world gone mad? We're often in difficult circumstances in our day job or in our community. How does this affect our confidence, do you think?
Look, we've all been in the situation where you've potentially slept in and the alarm clock's gone off and you're struggling to get your lunch packed and out the door, and you don't feel like you're wearing the most flattering jacket or suit or shoes, and you go out and you've got no petrol in the car, and you clamber your way through the morning and the headspace that you're in. There's an automatic feeling of I'm not my best. And I think it's a similar thing if the house isn't in order. When you leave the house and it's upside down, you don't feel like you're leaving it at its best. If we've got that extra 20 minutes to have the extra cup of coffee and make sure the children have got off safely and we've left the house, in a good space, and the dinner's waiting, defrosting on the counter, you go knowing all is well with my soul. So I think if we aim towards a more structured home that is in order and on time, your confidence is boosted automatically.
Well, we are running out of time, and just for listeners, we've been talking about personality types and temperaments, and Deborah mentioned the four that she likes to identify: goal setters, people who are lifestyle temperament orientation, those who want stability, and those who are information, the person who says, let's do it the right way. And there are all sorts of different ways that people think about those sorts of temperaments and personality types. But for those who'd like to connect with Deborah, Deborah has a website. It's deborahdejong.com.au. Deborah, Deborahdejong.com.au, deborahdejong.com.au. Deborah, as a behavioural consultant, thank you so much for taking some time to share your thoughts and your insights with listeners today on 2020.
An absolute pleasure.